Welcome to the broadcast. Here is a question for you. If Osama bin Laden is captured, where would he be tried and by what kind of court? A group of lawyers came to New York to talk about it, and we talked to some of them.
But there's going to be a whole group of other people who are captured high officials, and if we don't have something in place immediately, the default is going to be U.S. courts. With an expectation that it will be tried in U.S. courts. And so for these other options, we need to start putting stuff in place because the expectation is bring them back here.
But you didn't want to necessarily have the military sphere of life entirely overlap with the civilian sphere of life. And if you were to allow in the kind of hearsay that may be necessary to prove the case against bin Laden in a federal district court, it would do damage to our civilian standards.
One of the problems of the jury trial is that you just get a verdict and you don't have written findings of fact and conclusions of law. These international trials have these 100-page conclusions, like the 15 volumes at Nuremberg, that then become the historic record that people can turn to in the future and that can withstand the forces of revisionism so that no one is accusing us of making Osama bin Laden the scapegoat. Everybody can see the evidence that was proved at trial.
And who's going to win the World Series? Roger Angell writes for the New Yorker magazine, and he's a pretty smart guy about baseball.
And the Yankees have already put themselves in a 0-2 hole against the A's, as you recall, and came back from that. You can't do it over and over again, I don't think.
So it could be a sweep for.
Well, I doubt.
I
doubt the sweep. I doubt. I'd be surprised at a sweep.
President.
But I've had sinking feelings about this Yankee team before, and they've surprised us.
And what kind of year will Michael Jordan have? A couple of basketball mavens weighed in.
When he left, there was a sense of, okay, now it is our league. We can do what we want to do. We can market our own products without fear of retribution from Michael on the court. And now I think there's a sense of, he's back again, and at some point we have to get rid of the teacher. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have to find a way to show that we've learned and studied enough to pass the test.
I think that he missed the thrill of going out, preparing, getting on the court, and he's, he felt that he did. I think he felt he retired prematurely, and I think he feels another year or two. And from what I've seen in preseason, I mean, he's still among the best players in the league.
Osama bin Laden's trial, the World Series, and Michael Jordan when we continue.
Funding for Charlie Rose is made possible by Amazon.com, your online source for everything from books, music, and toys to videos, electronics, and tools.
Charlie Rose is also made possible by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide. From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
One of the hottest debates in legal circles is what should happen to Osama bin Laden if he is captured, not killed in Afghanistan, but captured. Where should he be tried? What kind of tribunal? What kinds of laws would apply? It's a hot subject in legal debate, and it was the subject of an international conference this past weekend in New York, with lots of lawyers and professors talking about it. Joining me now for a discussion, Ruth Wedgwood, professor of international law at Johns Hopkins University, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Anne Marie Slaughter, professor of international law at Harvard Law School. Juliette Kayyem, executive director of the program on domestic preparedness at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. She is also a former member of the National Commission on Terrorism. Also here, Michael Sharp, director of the Center for International Law and Policy at the New England School of Law. I begin with Professor Slaughter. Tell me what we ought to be thinking about when we consider the question of the huge ramifications of Osama bin Laden captured. Where should he go? What law should apply? Who should be public, private, etc.? Start us off.
Well, the first thing I think you have to say is you got to think about what should happen to Osama bin Laden, but you also have to think about what's going to happen to all the people who are going to come after him, particularly if he is captured. If he is not captured, there's still going to be lots of defendants. So this debate has to take place in that context as well. But I would say clearly U.S. courts are going to have jurisdiction to try him. They may well try him, but a better alternative in many ways would be an international tribunal that would be composed of high court judges from around the world, co-chaired by a U.S. Supreme Court justice and a distinguished Islamic jurist of similar rank. That court could try him and others for crimes against humanity, terrorism of all kinds, could apply international law, fill in the gaps with national law. It would be far easier for countries to extradite him, or more likely others, to such a tribunal, and their judgments would be more legitimate. But such a tribunal would work with national courts. It wouldn't be the only option, but it'd be a very important option.
Jump in on that. I like the idea of an international court, but one of the problems that we saw in the Pan Am 103 trial was that it takes months to negotiate such a court, to appoint the judges, to appoint a prosecutor, to get the law all agreed to. There's a much easier and quicker solution. All the Security Council has to do is, in one foul swoop, pass a new Security Council resolution expanding the jurisdiction of the existing ad hoc criminal tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, so that the judges who are already there, which include 4 or 5 judges from Islamic countries and several that are actually Muslims on the bench, could hear this case. And you wouldn't have to create a whole new courtroom. You wouldn't have to have the political wrangling to get a new bench and a new prosecutor, and it could be done very quickly. And this is a court that has proven itself to be very fair and very effective. It's a court that the rest of the world has seen as an international court, not a U.S. court.
I think an international court would be most appropriate if we were in the situation where bin Laden was held by a third party, and they made it, like they did in the Pan Am 103 case, conditional of his release to not be tried in the United States. I think that would be something we'd have to consider. But let's assume that doesn't happen and we capture him alive. I think the United States courts, it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to try security, protection of the jurors, protection of the judge, our Classified Information Procedures Act. But we're the appropriate tribunal in terms of we were the victims of this, and we had the most people killed in this. This was clearly an anti-American incident with implications for other countries, clearly, but it was focused on us, and there's nothing to suggest that we couldn't do it. There are, of course, legitimacy reasons out there to have it in an international tribunal. The court might be, or the verdict might be considered more legitimate by Islamic countries, but I actually think that the issue, the legitimacy of trying bin Laden or his innocence or guilt is not going to be solved in a court of law. That is a diplomatic issue.
Okay, but let me focus on what's the balance for you. You think that in terms of American interest, and there were people from 80 countries were killed here. You are saying that it's important, for what reason, to be tried, say, in the United States, in a state court, I assume it would be.
Well, yeah, district court,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Not a federal court, but a state court? Or
No, it would be district court. It would be federal district court.
Okay.
There's a lot of issues that would be in our favor in this regard.
Let me just interrupt you. Why would it be a federal court rather than, what's the federal question rather than a state issue?
It's a federal crime to commit terrorism. It's a federal crime to commit terrorism. It's like a drug case would be in federal court. And likely it would be in New York, although there would be some wrangling with D.C. right now. There's some fights going on there. But, I mean, in terms of not just the focus of where the terrorists are aiming and also where they're going to aim in the future, we have a lot to gain by a trial occurring here. I mean, we are, for good or for bad, the focus of this Islamic fundamentalist threat right now with terrorists. We have a lot to learn about what that threat is, and one good way to learn it is to try a case against them, because that's a way that we can talk to terrorists who are willing to plea, get intelligence from share the intelligence within our own community, intelligence communities and law enforcement communities. And it just seems to me that in international courts work best when the country is either, the country, victimized country, is either unwilling or unable to try it, as we've seen in the past. But in terms of our interest,
go ahead.
It's predominant. I mean,
Can I give you option 4, though?
Okay, me option 4, them all on the table. All right, I know you. All right, option 4.
I hate being the Americanist here.
Option 4 is
So we got the UN, we've got America, we've got create an international court, right? And we've got what?
Well, my concern about many of these other alternatives is that one of the problems we've seen in the existing terrorism trials, the embassy bombing trial that just finished last spring, and the older World Trade Center trial from 1993, is that in the very course of trial, with the transparency that we expect in sort of American-style due process in civilian times of peace, there's a real problem that when a network is still out there and operating, they will learn from the very process of trial information that's useful to them. What wiretaps we have, what methods of surveillance we have, what the stability of a building is, as in the World Trade Center trial before. And one of the problems is that with our expectations about civilian due process in this country, there's very little monkeying that we can or should do with our ordinary civilian trials. The option used in World War II, in the middle of the war, when FDR and Churchill were afraid that trying cases in public would prejudice the war effort, was to use military commissions. There are a number of Supreme Court cases, Ex parte Quirin, the Yamashita case, Johnson against Eisentrager, and though some of those proceedings were held in private, which I do not advocate, we have different expectations now.
So you should be held in public.
As public as you can make it, but let me just give you the two examples where it makes a big difference. In federal district court, I used to prosecute, I love doing it, and it's a great métier, but hearsay is simply not admissible. So if you had as a particle of evidence that Osama bin Laden called his mother, say, and said, "Mom, the big one's coming," and indeed the big one came, if mother wouldn't testify, if his mom had simply told it to her friend, and he had the friend willing to testify, you couldn't introduce it into trial. It's hearsay. Whereas in most of the decisions we make in our ordinary lives, we use hearsay all the time with tests for its reliability. And the second problem, which I think is particularly present and sharp in the case of an international tribunal, is going to be a real limit to what we can disclose, even to judges. And oftentimes in a trial, if you want to make sure you're being fair, you'll tell a judge intelligence information that you won't tell the other side, asking him to rule on its irrelevance, say. And wonderful as many of the judges are on the Yugoslav Tribunal and elsewhere, there are security considerations that the U.S. has not been able to overcome in sharing intel with the Yugoslav Tribunal, and would be certainly it would obtain here. And finally, on the Islamic idea, I do think it would be culturally wonderful to have some Islamic participation, but it's going to be a very brave judge and a very brave Islamic country that would dare hold such a trial. So I think a mixed military commission is possible, but a court with one from every country I think is very impractical.
There's a fifth alternative that we haven't even mentioned, and that is a trial in a foreign country. When I was at the State Department, I was attorney for counterterrorism affairs, and there was a case in 1989 called the Rashid case, where this PLO terrorist had put a bomb on an aircraft, and he was in Greece, and the Greeks refused to surrender him because they said it was a political offense. So instead of extraditing him, we went and we sent the Department of Justice to Greece with just a ton of boxes, and for 3 months they walked the Greek authorities through the case. Then they sat right behind them and whispered in their ear during the entire trial, and we got a conviction and a life sentence. So it is possible that some of these people, maybe not bin Laden himself, but others should be tried at foreign courts with our assistance.
Let me try to make sense of all this. Go back to a point you wanted to make.
Well, in many ways, it's not going to be any one of these options. It's going to be a bunch of these different options. We're in this for a long haul, and there are many, many defendants out there, and some of them we're going to capture here. And when we capture them here, we're going to try them in U.S. court. They have constitutional right to be tried in U.S. court. Some will be our own nationals. Some will be nationals of other countries. We'll try them here. Some are going to be caught in third countries and tried there. If the Germans arrest somebody on German soil, they're not going to extradite him to us because of the death penalty. They'll try him. Some cases we'll find them in countries like Jordan or Egypt or Pakistan. They can't extradite to us. In those cases,
no extradition treaty, or
there may not be an extradition treaty, or politically it may be impossible
There are many
for a
other ways to
government.
surrender a
Or the
person.
death
Well, they may.
penalty
They,
may be as well.
I'll get to the capital punishment in a moment.
Not in an
I'll
Islamic
get to
country,
that.
but the point being, in those situations, yeah, you could go kidnap them. But absent that, what you need is an alternative where they can be tried. So an international tribunal, possibly an existing one, I would propose setting up one would make more sense, is going to work. Possibly some military tribunals, but honestly, Ruth, you are, in the first place, what you're doing is saying we ought to change the values we stand for and the values they're attacking. We should not have our normal standards of due process, and we're going to try him as a soldier, which is exactly what he wants.
But I do agree with you to the extent that none of these are mutually exclusive. It will happen. All of them probably will happen, or some form of them will happen over the long run. My concern is we do need to start to think about this now and make a decision, because if we, I mean, I guess the seventh option, are we at 7 options now, is that, bin Laden is killed. Clearly that is I think the priority of the Bush administration. No one wants him, and I think
That's not legal in the law of war, I point out. But,
no, that's right. But I mean, it's appealing to we have a
That's
military
a
action
disputed
going on
question.
now.
This
It's
is-
very likely that he will not survive.
If he surrenders, he.
This is the so-called bring justice to him, I'm
Right,
sure.
exactly,
kill him if
and
he
it's
surrenders.
out there. So we have to admit that. But there's going to be a whole group of other people who are captured high officials, and if we don't have something in place immediately, the default is going to be U.S. courts. With an expectation that it will be tried in U.S. courts. And so for these other options, we need to start putting stuff in place because the expectation is bring them back here.
Let me just ask this question because I think it goes to your point. How important is credibility in the world community because of the significance of what happened on September 11th and what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan, that we are at a new point in history, and credibility and how this is handled has implications for the future battle. It's important, for example, that the world knows the evidence against bin Laden. It's important that fairness is shown here, and it's important that also, that the notion of justice takes place. And I mean by that, someone who's guilty is brought to justice, and that shows that you are accountable for your crimes.
And what better way, in some respect, than to treat bin Laden or his highest deputies as just mere criminals. I mean, they're awful criminals. No one's minimizing what they did, but to treat them what they are, which is their criminal enterprise.
These things are not mutually exclusive, though, because bin Laden, even by his own terms of reference, is a criminal. He's a criminal under the law of war. What he's done is to violate the most sanctified principle of the law of war, which is you don't target civilians. And when you do hit a military object, you do it in a proportionate way. So even in terms of credibility, even by his own terms, he's a war criminal. And I do think also that some of the difficulties, much as I am their supporter and enthusiast, some of the difficulties that the war crimes tribunals have had operating effectively and efficiently aren't suitable here. We have to have a trial that gets to the point that is
They're not
concluded.
suitable because
They have a hard time getting through the work. There's no way that an ad hoc tribunal like Yugoslavia or the Rwanda tribunal could ever try 400 people. They're up to 7, 10, 12, 15
But they
people.
could expedite a trial for bin Laden
You could try bin Laden singularly,
or his top lieutenants.
but my other concern, frankly, is that you need a trial where you're not concerned that the judges themselves will be intimidated.
But here's the problem. Bin Laden is trying to cast this as United States against Islam. Bush is trying his best to counter that by saying it is the international community against terrorism. If he is tried in a U.S. court, I'm not even sure the U.S. Supreme Court under the Shepard precedent would find that either a D.C. or New York jury was not irrevocably tainted by all the pretrial publicity against Osama bin Laden or maybe his top lieutenants. So, and if that's the case in the United States, think about it
that's a different-
worldwide.
I mean, but that it would be worldwide. I think that's a different. I mean, there's no one who sort of advocates having the trial here who would deny that issues from security or voir dire or protection of the jurors is an issue. It's an issue for an international tribunal as too, and so we can't pretend like putting it abroad is going to cure everything.
But
I mean,
if the judges are representing the different countries of the world, including the Islamic countries, then Bush can say this is the international community against terrorism, not the U.S. against Islam.
no, the U.S.
I
versus
want to
bin
hear
Laden.
from you as to what interest ought to be served by putting him on trial,
Well,
or answer whatever question you start answering.
I would say what we need to think about here is making sure we win the war, not just any one battle. So, of course, we want to bring bin Laden to justice, but we've got to think about what it is that we stand for over the long term. We have to think, credibility issues are enormously important. I was in Europe this morning, and from the European point of view, even now, when you would expect a lot of sympathy, the questions being asked are, where's the proof? Isn't this the United States throwing its weight around again? So we have
Who's
to...
saying that?
People...
No, I'm serious. I don't mean that like how could they possibly say it, but who's saying it? Because, you have Tony Blair, who's a
Absolutely.
respected European leader, and you have Musharraf and others are saying, we have seen this evidence, and it's important that the president doesn't want to disclose it. Yet you're saying that...
but even in England, 20,000 people turned out. 20,000, that's a lot of people in London. It's a lot of people for Tony Blair. And outside of England, on the continent, in the public, if you read the Spanish newspaper, I was in Portugal today just talking to academics, but also people in government, there's more skepticism. It's not that there...
Skepticism as to whether Osama bin Laden was behind the attacks on the World Trade Center?
Some, but also skepticism in terms of how the United States is responding, a sense that if it's only bombs, that won't do, and a strong sense that this cannot be the United States once again dictating to the rest of the world how we're going to fight this fight.
But the injury was here. It was a crime on our soil against our people.
Unquestionably.
And we can invite foreign observers, and we can take and ask for and thank them for cooperation from foreign intelligence services. But in traditional jurisdictional terms, this was very much an American injury.
But Ruth, why don't you think about Nuremberg and Tokyo as the
Nuremberg was a military tribunal.
Yeah, well, it was, but it was made up of U.S. judges. It was not. It was certainly not done in secret. It was done in public.
Nuremberg admitted lots of hearsay evidence that would not be admissible in federal district court.
Maybe, but the point
But you're
being
saying you have no problem with Nuremberg precedent.
Well, when I teach Nuremberg, I always have my students look at how far it deviates from their standard civilian idea of due process. I think it was a marvelous trial for the purpose of the re-education of the German people, and this trial will have some of that effect, to be sure. But I think we can't tie ourselves up in knots where you get a verdict that's 20-10 among the judges of the world, and then the doubters have 10 judges who may be intimidated, who say he's innocent.
When the Africa Embassy bombing case happened, over 200 Africans died, only about 12 Americans, and then we didn't have this debate. Everyone thought we had jurisdiction. They bombed the embassies, and the Africans could do what they wanted. But once we got these guys from other foreign intelligence agencies, we should try them here. It's like the magnitude of this of September 11th sort of changed everyone, and the way that they thought about it, as if somehow we had I don't want to say less interest, but somehow we wanted to make this create a new kind of law for this, whether it's international, military, whatever. And I think that the Africa Embassy case was a sort of a good example, to the extent that we got these guys, we brought them back here. In my personal opinion is we're not going to get Bin Laden won't be tried. So we're talking about the other deputies or whoever else.
But that's because you think he'll be killed.
And I agree.
Hold on. So
I'm a lawyer.
The reason we're thinking differently is because President Bush himself. It's President Bush who went on stage a week after the attack, and he stood up, and he was the first person to say so. We'd had a week of America attacked everywhere. President Bush stands up and he says, this is not America's fight. It is the world's fight. 80 people died. It is he framed this issue as a fight of all legal systems and all civilized people against criminals. So therefore, at least one of the options, and again, I don't doubt that U.S. courts have jurisdiction, and I don't doubt that they're going to exercise it in many cases. One of the options ought to be an international tribunal that recognizes this. I completely disagree with you. Islamic judges of any who have written at all condemn this absolutely under the Quran and are only too happy to prove that this is not Islam. And that's what the president has been saying. This is not Islam. These are criminals.
Let me add to that by referring to what you said a few minutes ago. You said one of the keys to this whole thing is establishing a historic record. Well, one of the problems with the jury trial is that you just get a verdict and you don't have written findings of fact and conclusions of law. These international trials have these 100-page conclusions, like the 15 volumes at Nuremberg, that then become the historic record that people can turn to in the future and that can withstand the forces of revisionism, so that no one is accusing us of making Osama bin Laden the scapegoat. Everybody can see the evidence that was proved at trial.
We're going to have a real dilemma, though, because many of the people who we do catch, say in a cave in Afghanistan, who are hanging around with some Al-Qaeda members, we're going to have very little proof against them. So I think one of the other issues we have to face is, what do we do with folks we think are combatants, albeit illegal combatants, when there's no proof available, really, to put them on trial as such for war crimes, unless you had a very, very exaggerated, robust, I'll call it, theory of conspiracy. And so I think one of the issues we have to face is there a right of kind of law of war detention of combatants until the end of the conflict, difficult as that is to define.
Especially since they said this conflict is never going to end, or it's going to go 20 years.
We do that in most wars. We don't try most soldiers. We put them into POW detention. Yeah. And here I think the problem we're going to face, I mean, particularly prosecutors always feel sorry for themselves because the burden of proof is a really heavy burden.
Go ahead.
We've actually met the burden of proof. I'm amazed to hear you say this as a prosecutor. Phil Hyman, when he was Deputy Attorney General, said, look, when we proposed to bomb Iraq for the attempted assassination of George Bush Sr., there was initially it must be Iraq, we're going to go after him. The Justice Department said, we want to see proof. We want to see evidence that this is in fact who did this. We've been able to come up with this evidence. That I can't tell you, but the point is, but the point is here, and similarly, in the cases you mentioned, we've come up with this proof.
Criminal proof is totally different from foreign policy proof. It really is.
No, but you're saying we got these terrorists in these caves, and
Right.
we can't provide evidence that in fact they were.
We can't let them run around loose.
Well, I'm not.
doing
I
whatever
don't
they're
have any
doing.
problem with detaining them
And
until we try them, but we got to try them.
The great mystery of the law to lay people always is that criminal proof, what's admissible under the federal rules of evidence, is almost a tiny fraction of what you rely on in everyday life.
I mean,
Let me just one second, Julie. But let me make sure I understand exactly what you would like to see, and I want to make it not in terms of the lieutenants or the captains or the privates in Al Qaeda, but Bin Laden himself. Let's assume, and there seems to be a consensus here or unanimity, that he'll never make it live out of Afghanistan. That seems to be.
If he wants to surrender, he has a right to surrender.
I understand it. And the president has said that if the Taliban would turn him over, he'd stop the bombing. So
His own people murder him. So.
yeah, they would murder him. Yeah.
They'd may turn him into a martyr.
Tell him
Right.
to murder him, too.
Okay. What is it you would do with him? You would bring him to the United States?
I would not.
You would do what?
I would convene, and these can be handcrafted, and it depends on the circumstances, but I would convene a military commission that operates as openly as it can.
What military? Military, U.S. military, U.S. British military?
It's an idea under the law of war, the customary law of war. You can have foreign judges on them. It's accepted under the law of war. It's designed to try war crimes. And what it does is to let you have some flexibility without tainting American-style due process. I would cite in my camp, I think, Justice Jackson of the Nuremberg trials, who worried that you didn't want to necessarily
Who was the
dilute.
prosecutor at the
Yep.
Nuremberg
And
trial.
a Supreme Court justice. That you didn't want to necessarily have the military sphere of life entirely overlap with the civilian sphere of life. And if you were to allow in the kind of hearsay that may be necessary to prove the case against bin Laden in a federal district court, it would do damage to our civilian standards.
I just want to make sure I have, because I want to come back to this and I'm repeating myself. So your primary interest you want to be served is in this military court is what? What's the interest you think is crucial to serve?
Judges who feel safe, so they're not intimidated against giving a fair verdict.
Right.
Some greater latitude in the admission of evidence and the protection of American intelligence. And finally, not bringing the threat home to America. I don't have to fly air cover over the Southern District of New York.
And the interest you want to be served, most importantly, is the credibility within the eyes of the world for all the benefits of that.
I want the.
And a clear Muslim representation in order to make sure that this doesn't become some poor Islamic victim.
And the vindications of our values. I would want to see.
Which is fairness.
Which is fairness, which is justice. I agree that certainly some of these people will be killed, but to the extent we have somebody that we've captured and we're claiming that they're criminals, we have to try them, and we try them under our system consistent with our values. So it's essentially putting our money where our mouth is.
Under our system, but if it's an international court, how is it under our system?
Fair enough.
Touche.
Touche. Well, actually, that's not true. I proposed a tribunal of national judges, of national high court judges, a U.S. Supreme Court justice, an equivalent Islamic justice. One of the reasons that I would favor that over a traditional tribunal of international lawyers is precisely to emphasize that this is condemned under all the world's legal systems. International law is composed not only of treaties and custom, but also of general principles
But whose law are you
recognized by
gonna
all
apply?
civilized nations.
Which law?
You'd apply international law, but it would be filled in by the customs of all the national legal systems.
There's a civil war going on at the War Crimes Tribunal between common law judges
No,
and
no,
civil
no,
law.
but
the non-law
Yeah.
professor will.
I'm repeating myself, but the interest you would like to be served is
If they
primarily.
are guilty of killing Americans, they are found guilty by a jury in an American court. And that's, and like, because they're a criminal enterprise. They're a whole lot more, and I agree with Anne-Marie, you know, you're sort of hearing a debate of a, I don't mean to, dying empire here. The law enforcement folks, we're no longer, you know.
Who's the dying empire?
The lawyers. We're no, you know.
I'm a lapsed lawyer, by the way.
So during Bush 1 and Clinton, the lawyers took the key role in our fight against terrorism. It was, you know, USS Cole gets bombed, we send over 400 FBI agents and a bunch of DOJ attorneys. That's the way we did it. Obviously, September 11th changed everything. So I think this debate is all the stuff about legitimacy and coalition building and whether Islamic countries will accept us is not a legal debate. It's bigger.
Your interest is primarily having the United Nations
You already
with
have
existing
an
institutions.
and it's going to prosecute Slobodan Milosevic. It can handle
Okay,
Osama
here's
bin
my
Laden.
question. What do we have to fear from putting bin Laden on trial? I mean, is there some risk generally, whatever the court is, or is it specific to particular courts, what's the risk?
If you don't have a well-administered trial, Richard May was good enough to quiet down Slobodan Milosevic when he was trying to use the arraignment as a platform.
This is when he was objecting and saying, this is a...
But if you don't have a crackerjack judge sitting on that trial, you're going to have this be made into the biggest propaganda event that the Islamic world has ever seen.
What do you think is the most likely thing to happen? Having expressed your opinions, what do you think is going to be the most likely result?
I think there's a chance he might sneak out of Afghanistan, and then he actually might be apprehended. There is that chance we can't dismiss. And if that's the case and he's in someone else's custody, it's not going to be a U.S. trial.
Here's something I don't understand. One of you very smart people can tell me this. Why haven't they put a much higher price on his head? Why aren't they offering
$50
$1
million.
billion?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
$1 billion. When you think about what this effort is going to cost,
Sure.
I don't understand
I
that.
think there's
There
a
must be an
very
answer.
clear reason.
What is it?
I don't think they want to try him.
They don't want to
They don't want to try him for all the reasons we've just been discussing.
You said once that if, in fact, he's tried in this country, you risk winning the battle and losing the war.
That's right.
For all the reasons we've said.
That's right. That's right. And there's another way of thinking about that, which is the president has said we need the UN. We need the UN for rebuilding Afghanistan, and we need the UN longer term. And it's very important that the UN have a role also in bringing people to justice. If we're going to be their partners, and if we're going to really reshape some of our very fundamental norms, which is what we're doing, we need to think about the long term.
In the end, some make this argument that this trial is not so much about guilt or innocence, it's a kind of didactic function. This is about teaching the world about terrorism, one place where you can have some kind of dollar. Now, you would argue that it might be to what? To
Teach them the wrong lessons.
I think they want to learn that terrorism doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, like Nuremberg, I want to have civic education and liberal values, but at the same time, it's absolutely mandatory we not let him get away again. And whether we should have arrested him earlier in the mid-'90s when we knew less about him is a very contentious question.
It's not
even
contentious
now.
at all. I mean, I think that clearly they think the answer that they should have. It's
I
just
wish we had.
the contention as to
96.
whether they executed their opportunities.
But here's where the Clinton administration had a deal with the Sudanese government that Sudan would surrender him if Saudi Arabia would take him. But Saudi Arabia wouldn't have taken him. If you'd had an international tribunal, we wouldn't be in this position
As
right
it turned
now.
out, we didn't lean on Saudi hard enough.
I don't think Saudi Arabia's going
That's a whole other debate about
all
it.
agree
All right, thank you all very much. I thank you for coming here. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The 2001 World Series is underway. This weekend, the Arizona Diamondbacks took a commanding 2-0 lead over the New York Yankees. So far, the Diamondbacks have relied on their overpowering pitching tandem of Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson to silence the Yankee batters. The series now moves to New York, with the Yankees looking to come back in the series and win their 4th straight championship. Joining me now to look at the series, Roger Angell, a frequent writer on baseball for the New Yorker magazine. I am pleased to have him here. As you have frequently said, good pitching always wins.
Well, somebody said it. We've certainly, we've certainly seen
Just
it.
giving it to you, Roger.
We've certainly seen it the last couple of nights. I mean, that was something. That was something. Just overpowering. And the strange thing to me, the amazing thing is that these two guys, Schilling and Johnson, are as good as they are together. Late in the season, they're really at their all-time peak. They've never been better, both of them. And these are older pitchers. These are not young guys.
Schilling is how old?
Schilling is 34.
And Randy's 38, 9?
38, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
But they're both better than they were 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. This is the phenomenon in sports that older players are doing better. Look at Clemens this year. I mean, extraordinary. He's going to win his what, 5th, 6th Cy Young Award. An amazing year.
How do you explain it, other than the fact that?
It's a lot of it is conditioning. They know much more about conditioning. But I think these guys are really motivated more. They focus more. And two people together help each other a lot. Schilling and Johnson hung out, and they're always together. You see them talking to each other. They're their own pitching coaches.
I know.
And two guys together are suddenly make them, both of them, much stronger. The same thing this year with Pettit and Clemens. Pettit has become Clemens' best friend. They work out together, and that's an extraordinary workout that Clemens does. And
He maintains weights in the
that's
whole
right.
go-round.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
So when you look at these two guys, what do you see when you see Johnson and Schilling on the mound in the first two games?
Well, Schilling is that overpowering high fastball people can't lay off, and threw a lot of backdoor sliders against left-handed batters, and he is a fierce autumn competitor, as we learned. Don't you remember him pitching for the Phillies a few years ago against Toronto? Remember that game that he won? He played,
Yeah.
competed so fiercely, and had that towel hanging over his head.
Yeah.
And tough guy. And Randy comes at you, he's 6'10", and comes at you sideways, and is right on top of the plate when he throws, and throws that devastating slider that is down by the feet of right-handed batters and out of the reach of left-handed batters. And what are you going to do?
So what are the Yankees going to do?
I don't know. I'm not sure they can do it this time. I'm not quite so sure. I think that I think Jeter is injured. I think he is not himself. I think ever since that fall into the box seats, that spectacular catch he made against the Mariners, fell back into the box and caught. Yeah.
He made another spectacular throw to home plate.
Yeah, well, that was before, but I think he's hurt. He wouldn't say so, but it doesn't seem to be his batting. He's not himself. And the Yankees have already put themselves in a 0-2 hole against the A's, as you recall, and came back from that. You can't do it over and over again, I don't think.
No, you can't come back. I mean, at some point.
Yeah.
It was like watching Sampras at the U.S. Open. He kept beating guys that you thought were going to beat him, and then finally came up against.
And we're going to
in the
be saying
championship.
goodbye to this great graduating class at the Yankees. The people have brought all these pennants. I mean, they're moving on anyway. O'Neill's going to retire.
Yeah.
Tino won't be picked up.
Martinez is gone.
Tino Martinez is going to go, I believe. Knobloch probably won't be back.
Not of his own.
It's a shame. It's been a great run. It's been an extraordinary run, and not just because of the World Series won, the four in a row, but and the great run since 1996, but a different tone that they have imposed at the stadium and all over baseball.
The interesting thing is that this also comes when the Yankees in this series seem to be loved by America because of what happened on September 11th.
Exactly.
Somehow all things have to do with feeling good about New York and its bravery and its pain as everything else.
Those were extraordinary moments at the stadium when the Yankees came back and won in the fashion that they did. And first of all, Jeter's play out there.
Yeah.
No one else had ever seen that. No one had seen that play before, ever. No one. And people in baseball still play. I never saw that play before.
I've never seen it, but I haven't seen a lot of baseball.
If he doesn't make that play, the Yankees lose. They're eliminated. There's no doubt about it. And then they win. They come back here and they win a game with an eighth inning tying home run by Bernie Williams and then a walk-off by Soriano. I mean, you can't do better than that. And Lou Piniella is so great. He always comes through with the right thing. I love Lou.
This is the manager of the Mariners.
Manager of the Mariners. And here he'd expected...
Former Yankee.
Former Yankee. He'd expected to win those games. Suddenly, I mean, his team had the best record of any modern team, games won.
116,
116. He wanted to go ahead and beat the Yankees' all-time record of 125. They set in 1996. All this is gone. He's losing. And he looks around in the eighth inning, and the Yankee fans, I've never seen them in such free form, and they're shouting, "Jorge, Jorge," for Posada, who's up, and they're throwing their hands up like people at a bullfighting ring. And they're taunting the Mariners. They're saying, "No game six, no game six," and overrated, more and more is coming out of them. And Lou looks around and he said, after it, he said, "I realized these people in New York had really, really suffered." And he said, "I was happy for them. I was really happy for them." And he said, "That's a hell of an admission for a team that's getting its ass waxed like that, or his ass whipped. And an amazing thing for a losing manager to say.
It is stunning.
Yeah.
The Diamondbacks are a story, though. I mean, they've got a new manager. Were they fourth last year?
They were fourth. The owner there, Jerry Colangelo, has Schilling said the other night, instead of knocking on the door of baseball, he kicked it in, and he spent huge amounts of money to bring a championship very quickly, and it's arrived in 4 years. And whether they'll go on or not, this is an old team. It's not a young team. It's the second oldest team in baseball. And whether...
Who are the oldest?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's the Yankees, but...
Braves, maybe?
Maybe the Braves, yeah. But he's got it done. And my feeling about the Arizona fans is they haven't suffered enough. I mean, 4 years is not long enough to be disappointed to... I mean, old fans understand.
They should go to Chicago.
That's right. Not that long, but I remember when the Padres played in the World Series a few years ago, and everybody, the old fans said they haven't been around long enough. They don't know what baseball's all about. But it's a very appealing and powerful team, and I think they're going to do it.
What does this game mean to you?
Well, it sure lightens up the year. I mean, I hate it when baseball.
So what it
ends.
means to you is it lightens up the year.
Well, I mean, it's been a good match for me.
It's been your canvas for how long? Your primary
I've been
canvas.
writing about baseball since 1962, I think, something like that, a long time.
And you've been at the New
planned
Yorker
it.
since what, 1940?
Well, I came there in 56, and I
56.
started writing there in 44.
Right.
That's a long time.
Right.
But it was a good mix for me. I mean, it's allowed me to be myself, to talk about something I'm interested in. And I think this is all writers need, is something that they really care about, that holds their interest.
And something that's fresh every day.
And it is fresh. It
You know,
renews itself, and you always see something you haven't seen before. I mean, the Jeter play is an example.
And the athletes are
It's
better
not
at...
just the play; it's when it's done. And at this time of year, a lot of friends of mine come around and they say, "Now I see what you've been talking about all this time." They forget when it starts over again, but they say there's nothing like baseball, nothing like it, and it's certainly true. And I think what it did for this town, not just the Yankees, but those were the first good moments that I had after September 11th, was in those Yankee games. And I think a lot of other people felt the same way.
Seeing those young men take the field and play ball.
Yeah, take their minds intently away from something for a while.
And we got people we like there, like Joe Torre. You know, I remember once I was out there and you said to me, was asking about something, and you said what you said tonight. They're adults. These are people who take seriously the game and the purpose and are mindful of that's a game.
Torre has become a great spokesman too. He's a great talker. I mean, he was talking about Jeter after that play, and he just spontaneously, he said when he first came here, he said there was a look in his eye I hadn't seen before from anybody, and he said this young man plays cool in hot situations, and he said he's a leader at a very early age. And this just all comes
I wouldn't be
down.
surprised if next year they don't make him captain.
Well, sure. But
Because
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. But you're predicting the Diamondbacks in what?
I'm not predicting. I never predict. But I mean, that's the
think the
Yankees
end
could
is
turn
here?
it about. I mean, I'm not very
I
optimistic.
know you're not predicting, but you don't. I mean, it looks bad.
It looks bad.
Do you
It
think
looks
Schilling will pitch in Game 3? In Game?
I think he might pitch. Yeah.
5.
Game 4
Four,
or 5.
four,
Game
four,
4.
four,
Yeah,
right.
which should be Wednesday.
So it will be Schilling against Hernandez.
Yeah, it's possible.
One of the great things about doing this job is Roger Angel will stop by occasionally and talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. A pleasure.
We'll be right back, and we'll talk about Michael Jordan coming out of retirement, his first big game on national television, October 30th at Madison Square Garden against the Knicks. Stay with us. When Michael Jordan retired from the NBA in 1998, he left at the top of his game.
Malone is doubled. They swat at him and steal him. Here comes Chicago. 17 seconds. 17 seconds from Game 7 or from championship number 6. Jordan open. Chicago with the lead.
Watch Jordan's left hand here as he gives Russell the push. Referee can't see that. Jordan frees himself up for a clean look. The greatest thing about Jordan is he has all the tricks.
That may have been the last shot Michael Jordan will ever take in the NBA.
Now, 3 years since he stepped away from the game, he is attempting another comeback at the age of 38. This time, the player often called the greatest ever will be a Washington Wizard. Tomorrow night, he begins the long road back in the Wizards season opener against the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden. Joining me to consider the return of Michael Jordan and what it means for him, for the league, for America. Mike Wise of the New York Times and Marv Albert, who calls games for NBC, TNT, and all the Knicks action on MSG. I am pleased to have them here. Welcome. Great to have you. It's great to have you.
Thanks.
You go out like that. I mean, it's just the idea of coming back has been talked about and talked about. And it best summed up, I think, by Michael, who says, I love the game.
Well, you know, if you're doing the screenplay, ideally, that would be the way he'd want it to end. I don't know how you feel about it, Mike, but he does love the game, and I think he will be among the top 7 or 8 players in the NBA this year. He needs a little bit more help from the supporting cast, but hey, if he wants to play, I see nothing wrong with it. I know people who picture the perfect ending object to it, and they say, well, all these young players who are beginning to peak are now going to be held back because Michael is back on the scene. I think it makes it more compelling to see the matchups with Kobe Bryant and Tracy McGrady and so on down the line. He won't match with Iverson because of the, obviously Allen Iverson's about a 6-footer and a different type of player, and Michael now is a very powerfully built small forward, so I think he's playing a different position.
Okay. Here's what's interesting about it. He says, a lot of things interesting about it, he says, I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't convinced I was among the top players in the game.
Which is almost frightening for the players in the game. I think, you know, the one thing, Charlie, and I think Marv feels the same way, that when he left, there was a sense of, okay, now it is our league. We can do what we want to do. We can market our own products without fear of retribution from Michael on the court. And now I think there's a sense of, you know, he's back again, and, you know, at some point we have to get rid of the teacher. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have to find a way to show that we've learned and studied enough to pass the test.
Yeah, they say they're shooting for the playoffs. That's the goal.
I put the Wizards in a group of 5 or 6 teams you take 4 teams, Orlando, Milwaukee, Toronto, and Philly, to me, and maybe Charlotte right on the fringe, should make the playoffs. And I put in that group the Knicks, Miami, the Nets, the Wizards, who it's very fragile. The East is going to be an incredible race to the playoffs, and I would never discount Michael Jordan. Although you look at the team now, and after seeing them in preseason, there's still a long way to go, and you wonder, can he play optimum every night, which he has to do to even just give them a shot to win, but they need people like Christian Laettner, one of your former Duke guys,
right.
Richard Hamilton,
one of the
Corey
great
Alexander.
shots in NCAA history.
But they need guys like that to pick it up. And Michael, also at the age of 38, going on 39, now maybe a bit more susceptible to ankle pulls and you know,
which he's already
that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, but there is this, which you guys know 100 times more about basketball than I do. But there is this: he's a teacher on the court. These guys will perhaps, because he's there on his side, as well as on the other side. The guys want to go against him. But he'll make them better players, right?
I think that's
he'll make
part
the
of the
Wizards
equation.
better.
Well, Kwame Brown, for example, was the #1 draft pick overall as a 19-year-old kid who has a lot of poise, but there's a long way to go. But I think he does look to Michael. There's a lot of respect, and in particular during practice, where Michael sets the tone. He has such an amazing work ethic. I think the problem early on during preseason was everybody was in such awe of Jordan. They were standing around. As a result, Doug Collins had a couple of practice sessions where he told Jordan, you cannot shoot. We don't want you shooting the ball. Let's see what these other guys can do.
The Knicks this year, what?
They're, as I mentioned, I think they're in a group of 5 or 6 teams that are going to battle for a playoff spot because they're so fragile due to Marcus Camby's condition. He's been put on the injured list, so he'll sit out 5 games. They need rebounding help. You know, they're a contending team, but I think the East is much more powerful than it has been in the past. So it's going to be a tough race.
And Miami?
I think that Pat Riley has done some patching. He picked up Rod Strickland, Chris Gatling the other day. I know he was thinking of going young, and now I think it all depends on Alonzo Mourning. If he's okay, they're solid. Brian Grant, Alonzo, Eddie Jones is back, but they're in that group that I mentioned.
Philadelphia will be much better.
I think they'll be. I don't know if they'll be better.
But
Much better. I think they're so banged up right now. I think the playoff experience cannot but help them as a team. I think when you go to the finals, you get that far and you realize what you're capable of. That in a big playoff game, that pays a lot of dividends. But I look at Toronto, I look at Orlando. I just see so many teams restocking out there.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have some problems.
well, Toronto's got Hakeem, right?
They do. And Orlando's got Ewing. It's sort of the battle of the ages. Orlando at the center position tomorrow night.
Philly could have a little difficulty, though. It's another go-around. Allen Iverson and Larry Brown kind of accepted each other last year, and I think they worked it out. At least it seems so publicly, and you wonder if that will that continue? Will they be able to coexist? Similar to the situation in L.A., it'll be interesting to follow Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. What will happen there? It worked out for them last year, but you have to wonder if there will be bumps again this season.
Which is amazing to me that nobody's even talking about them.
Shaquille,
going
right,
around.
that's right. Kobe.
Right.
And they were the first team in, I don't know, besides the Boston Celtics and the Chicago Bulls to have a shot at 3 titles in a row. I mean, in the last 4 decades. So Michael's impact is amazing.
What was the role, if any, of Phil Jackson in Michael's coming back? I mean, did he tell him not to do it? As I remember, in the beginning, he was saying, you left with the most incredible style.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
I have it on high authority that Phil wanted him to play for the Lakers.
Oh,
I don't know
so
that
that's
for
quite
sure.
different.
Actually, I don't know that. I just made
But
that
if
up
he was
right
going to play, wanted to play. You what?
Wait a
just
second,
made
this is
that
the New
up
York
right
Times,
now.
Charlie, come on.
No, I have no idea, but...
Hey, of course he'd wanted to play.
Yeah, I'm sure he wanted it, but did he really get in there and have a heart-to-heart with him about it? Boy, I don't know.